3, 2, 1. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are, and you still have the boredom and the courage to watch this show. Welcome again to the Fragility interviews. I'm here with Mr. Lloyd De Jongh, a man with many skills, and a man whom I found out looking for someone else that understands political Islam as good or even better than I do. Mr. De Jongh, welcome to my show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Right.
Thanks, Lucian.
Until we get to political Islam, there's one thing that I kept on bothering you about, because I kept on bothering other people as well, and everyone just bailed when you're originally from South Africa. So tell me about South Africa, because in February, let me tell you why I'm asking you this. In February, when I went to Zimbabwe, I was considering a short trip to South Africa as well, and a lot of the locals there were like, you shouldn't be doing that. And there is a lot of misinformation, not just propaganda, but misinformation going on about South Africa for over the last 10 or 15 years, really. It's not something that started a few days ago or a few months ago. So tell me about South Africa today, and then we'll go to your particular work, how we got along, how we got acquainted with each other.
South Africa is a beautiful country, and
Too bad it's covered.
Unfortunately, it has changed, and it is changing rapidly, and not for the better. Few people are aware that the current ANC government really is a communist government. In fact, they're a throwback to the 80s revolutionary communism. That's their legacy, and that's their heritage. And the top 6 of the ANC at the time were all communist trained, were all KGB trained, were all trained in Vietnam, in China, in Warsaw, which was part of the communist bloc at the time, and even by the KGB in Moscow. Our previous president was trained in KGB counterintelligence in Moscow, and they were terrorists. There's a reason they were called a terrorist organization, and they are implementing socialist policies, and it is ruining the country. It is destroying the country, and in fact, it is causing skilled people to flee. Those who have the means and the resources to flee, to do so. It is increasing poverty. In fact, black people are now poorer today than they were 25 years ago.
So you're saying under the immediately post-apartheid or even during apartheid, they were better off than now?
I would say yes. I moved out of the country in early 2007. I moved to the Middle East. I worked there for 11 years, and I would visit home obviously once or twice a year. And I could see the changes occurring, and I could see a level of frustration building, and then eventually I left the Middle East and I decided to move home. And I was home for 8 months before events caused me to basically pack all my stuff up again. And I just bought a house, just invested in the country essentially, bought a house, started a business, and I realized this was a very bad move, packed up, and within a month of certain events occurring, I was in Europe. Because the country's become more violent. There's 2 of my neighbors within two different nights, 2 consecutive nights. 2 of my neighbors were firebombed by rioters who had started squatting in a field across from where I lived, which is a good neighborhood, a very, very nice neighborhood. I lived in a secure complex, walled complex with security. Massive riots, Molotov cocktails, ended up in their bedrooms, ended up in their kitchen, ended up in their lounge, gutted both places next to mine. 5 meters to the left would have been my window, would have been me. And I could not, this is not something that I could, not a risk I was willing to take. And cars were destroyed, cars were burned out. The whole area was igniting, and these were land riots. Now, I'm not a farmer. My house is not a farm, and I bought that house. I worked for that. I paid for it legitimately, so I have not robbed anybody. So yeah, for me, this is an issue. There's a despair in the country that is palpable when you visit it today.
Is it organic, or it has been intentionally built up?
I think there's a sense of impending doom. People are seeing the rising poverty. People have been replaced by people who adhere to the party line. So a lot of competent people have been removed from jobs. They've had ANC adherents placed in those positions, people who are, based on the results, unqualified, incapable, and corrupt. If you look at the what's called the parastatals in the country, if you look at power utilities, our airline and so on, these are government or partly government-owned organizations, and they're all broke. They're all in debt. They're all needing bailouts. They're all in a very, very bad way, and it's costing the country billions. The water shortage was a huge embarrassment in Cape Town. That water shortage issue.
That was last year in July, wasn't it?
I was home for that, and issues of that nature just led to a loss of confidence in the government. And if you look at if I read the news, the current affairs, you see the growing loss of confidence in the country. There's no good news coming out of the country, and I don't hear good reports.
Yeah, but is it because this is all on the background of built-up resentment? Initially, I guess, started on the resentment on the white farmers, but then later on extended to anyone competent. And
but perhaps that would be a discussion that's probably a discussion for a different time. But for instance, the government has seized over 5,000 farms, of which very few of those, maybe less than 5%, have actually been handed over. Of those that have been handed over, because the government's still sitting on thousands of farms they've confiscated but not given to anyone, to black farmers, of the farms they have handed over, they've had a 95% failure rate. Of the 5% that are technically functioning, they're only sufficing to feed the farmer himself. So we've lost, I think, something like 30% of our industrial farming capacity to this, which means that we're now producing less food. We're now having to import food, which is driving up food costs. And if there's if something goes wrong, we don't have the capacity to provide food for the country. So this is a complete failure. And the government is now stepping up these policies. Now they're talking about taking land without compensation. Now, if your land is taken because of some potentially spurious claim, you have no legal recourse. Now, I bought and paid for a house. Now the government's also saying that, well, you own your house, but we own the land under it. Well, what happens if they want to claim that? That is a very dubious legal position. How can companies feel safe so if you look at reports, companies are divesting. We are hemorrhaging money and business and trust. None of these are good things.
Yeah. So you packed up and moved to Warsaw, which for now is much more decent safe haven.
Yes.
So while you're between jobs, you started a very similar hobby with mine. Let's put it this way. Is it fair to describe it as it's a very similar hobby in which you started tracking down propaganda of various kinds and deconstructing arguments and so on and so forth? And that's how we got to know each other, through a mutual friend who is following both of our works, and they say, oh, this one intersects, so you should probably meet. So you've been busy working on Islamic propaganda in particular, and also anti-Semitic propaganda. Let's go through both of them, because they are intertwined, and you got to be acquainted with my work because you found out about Dugin.
Correct. Well, one of my colleagues in the project utilized your definitive work on Dugin for two of our episodes, which he found invaluable. And so we found a great deal of use for your work, because also there's an overlap with communism. Unfortunately those work together.
Dugin is the founder of the National Bolshevik Party, so of course there is a lot of overlap. So tell me about Islamic propaganda. How does it function? Where does it come from?
Based on my time in the Middle East, working in a sensitive role, I had opportunity to travel extensively in the Middle East, so I have a huge amount of experience. I've had an opportunity to sit in a lot of places quietly and just listen or observe, and usually after certain major events would happen in the Middle East, I would often be on the ground not long after, providing some sort of service. So I educated myself. I had opportunity to listen and to read, to learn, and to see firsthand. And I realized that in the West, these issues are, while the level of violence is not quite there yet, although we have seen an uptick since 2015, it was really, there was certainly infiltration happening, there was subversion, there was certainly migration occurring, which was bringing a lot of these people and these attitudes and embedding them into Western culture, and Western culture is not ready for this. It certainly has no idea what it is bringing in.
Can you give an example of subversion that is easily traceable?
You do see a distinct rise, for instance, in attacks on Jews in France, in Germany, in various places where there's been Islamic immigration.
Sweden.
You're seeing desecration of churches. You're seeing desecration of of synagogues. You're seeing attacks on Jews. You're seeing violence, and Jews are fleeing these areas. And this is directly related to the ideology of Islam. If you look at the life of Muhammad, you see that obviously he says very, very violent things, incites violence towards Jews, even Christians, but he has a special hatred for Jews. And being that we are bringing in unvetted migrants, and because we don't understand the ideology, these actions are allowed to happen, and we're excusing it because of the bigotry of low expectations. The soft bigotry, as people say, but
it's not soft.
Yeah,
it's just bigotry.
It's a problem, and I see this, and I've seen it in the Middle East, and I'm seeing it in the West, and I'm seeing lots of supposedly well-meaning Westerners defend this, which is, and this, they're bringing in people that hate them. They're bringing in an ideology that despises them. Now, there's lots of things that one can argue, but I've done numerous episodes on YouTube where I go into the ideology in detail.
Yeah, well, there's going to be links in the low bar for sure.
And of course there's the Muslim Brotherhood, which is driving a lot of this, the biggest organization that influences this, that is pushing a lot of this, and it has its own very toxic ideology.
How much does it take to work? Because I've seen some of your work on Muslim Brotherhood, and it's a lot of it's in very great detail. Now, some of those details I was aware of myself, but some of them were pretty illuminating. How much does it take to do that kind of work?
You've seen my initial written database. It is, as you can see, it is years of work. That is years. I mean, many, many years of patient collection of data, research. So I had to go and collect the English version. Some of them I had to wait years. Some of them have only since about the mid-2000s have the Islamic books been converted into, translated into English. So I have a huge collection of almost every single Sharia manual in English, all of the biographies of Muhammad, several versions of the Quran, as well as documents from various Islamic groups. So it took me a long time, months, and in fact I had to wait years for some of these books to be translated. So that took time. To do a show that's 90 minutes long takes me about 8 hours of work, but I had to put in several years of research, just cataloging that. So it takes me about 6 to 8 hours just to do a 90-minute show. And obviously if you know the subject really well, it's easier, but we insist on having detailed links, detailed names, page numbers, book names, references, citations. We make them public so anyone can check them. We try not to talk in too many broad strokes. We want to back up what we say so people can verify what we say.
Yeah. What was the reaction to some of that? Because oftentimes, especially if I'm looking at your Facebook page, it becomes, I know what you mean, I understand what you mean, then I'm like, haha, that's funny, that's bait. But most people don't know that.
I must admit, I do bait people. I am looking for that response. Now, part of that is because, maybe it's a personality trait. Part of it is that actually I am looking for a response. I actually want to see how do they... I started studying the arguments they use, the ideology that's driving it. So I went out deliberately for several years online, deliberately kicking the hornet's nest to see. I wanted to see what are the arguments they put forward. What are the counter arguments they utilize? What are the facts? So eventually, with my group, my small group, we started documenting this. So I would put something out as bait. They would bite, and they would start throwing out their talking points. We cataloged those talking points, and we were able to then deconstruct them, go back, research, check them factually, see what the sources were, and we've now been able to start to build a counter to that, a database that has counters to this, that shows that every single one of these talking points is false. Also, we've realized that this entire effort is centralized. And not only that, the perpetrators, the main perpetrators also hide in the shadows. They are recruiting well-meaning atheists, well-meaning nominal Christians, well-meaning liberals, secular people, to do their what do you call it? There's a word for it, but to basically to
do their bidding.
To do their bidding for them, to push this propaganda and push these lies for them in the name of moral righteousness. So, but ultimately it ties back to the communist influence as well as the Islamic influence, and they're working together at this point, at least.
Why does that happen? Why do so many communists who are technically or supposed to be atheists, they're supposed to be anti-religious and anti-religion in general, why, in your opinion, because it's obviously a fact, a lot of communists, they're working with militant Islamists. Why is this happening, in your opinion?
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
That's it?
That's one reason. Of course, they don't realize that Islam is a saying, don't let your enemy know that he's your enemy. So they're a little bit smarter. Essentially, they're both enemies of the West. They're enemies of Western government, they're enemies of Western morality, Western norms, and they both have a common goal. And also in communism, the whole idea of equality. So everyone's the same, right? There's no differences. To discriminate or to be able to tell the difference between that.
Because that's what discrimination means, the ability to tell the difference.
That's a sin. That's one of the cardinal sins.
It's absolutely haram in communism, for sure.
Well said. Well said. So there's numerous reasons. We don't have to detail every single one, but they're revolutionaries. They want to see the downfall of the West. Also, they've taken a black eye, and they want to reassert their dominance. They're both supremacist ideologies, and these are people that are unable to look at their own faults. They blame others for their own mistakes. So they really want this victory. They see a weakened West, but the West is not weakened. The West has not been weakened organically. This is a deliberate effort through ideological warfare. We're talking military warfare doctrine to weaken the West, and it is decades and decades of work from at least two different sources.
So it's a long march through institutions.
Correct.
And is there a possibility, now I've been attacked multiple times for professing the belief that there is a possibility for the non-left, as I like to call it, because it's not always conservatives, it's not even always liberals, it's not even always Christians. I mean, most of my co-workers are atheists, but I profess this belief that there is a possibility for those of us who understand this to do our own long march through institutions. Is that a possibility in your mind?
Yeah, I've proven it. Yes, it's not that hard. I think the issue was a lack of preparation. No one had really sat down to. There was a culture of firefighting or looking at things as individual, isolated incidents. That is a mistake. In fact, that's been deliberately imposed, right? And also with the control that these people are gaining of social media, they're imposing they've been preparing the ground. They've been already putting stumbling blocks in the way of opposition. So once I started reading through the kind of military propaganda and the military ideology they're operating with, I was able to understand their methods. It's really quite simple. And I was then able to deconstruct what they did by going and annoying them to see what they say. And yes, we can. If you know the facts, when they use broad strokes. They'll say, what about, in 3 words. Well, if you...
What about my US imperialism?
Yes. Now, if you have facts, you can immediately undercut their argument. They start to lose credibility immediately. And in fact, you can identify them as a liar, and you can identify that as a lie. That the audience, now remember, a lot of the time you are talking to the audience, not really that person. Sure, you want to slap him around a little bit and, mop the fool a little bit with his face, but that's fine and well, but you want to inoculate.
And you really love that.
Unfortunately I do, but you want to, and they deserve it, but you want to inoculate the audience against that. And another thing, their ideology is fragile. Totalitarianism is fine and well, but these are even more fanatical. They fall into a category one would call totalist, and their ideology is very fragile. They want to control the truth so much. They push a lie that obviously is fragile because it's clearly not true.
So the difference between totalitarian and totalism is that totalitarianism understands that there are limits to which you can push your control,
Correct.
whereas totalists do not.
They want to own your mind.
That.
They want to own your mind. Like the communists wanted to own your labor. These people want to own your mind. They want to control every thought
Well, the
you
communists
think.
did try to own our minds back in Romania.
Granted, but there was a limit of freedom. Look, in Poland, they allowed certain activities, like the church and various other activities. They didn't try to create that degree of conformity. They realized there was a limit. But also, ideological warfare methods have changed. They've improved. They've been studying. I keep getting told, study this guy from 1911, read this book from 1927. Like, why? That is old news. I don't care that the guy was a senior genius in psych warfare back then. He's irrelevant today.
Probably most of his methods have been improved significantly over the last.
And we need to
years.
start looking at methods developed in the late 70s and the 80s and onwards. That's where a lot of that work was done, right? And it's now, obviously with the social media age, it's accelerated. So the totalists, though, their weakness is that any truth will immediately shatter the illusion, because they're creating very fragile illusions. They got to create a bubble. Any truth will shatter that bubble. Hence, they are frantic when they see facts. So while we can argue over truth because it's potentially fuzzy, facts. Just present facts. Just put down facts. Just be willing to state a few facts, and that ruins the spell they're trying to create. It just breaks the spell.
Let's test that. What about U.S. imperialism in the Middle East? Aren't we at fault? Aren't we at fault for we as in the Judeo-Christian civilization, aren't we at fault for the...
So that's an argument based on shame and based on ignorance, what I call amnesia, right? So when you start to deconstruct that, if you look at the US hasn't even invaded Canada, they haven't invaded Mexico. They could, right? Now, if you look at the number of countries the US has helped out of poverty, Japan, Germany, Europe. Now, if you look at the technology in the Middle East, if you look at the standard of living that other cultures have adopted from the US, is that imperialism or is that simply altruism, right? Obviously with the business focus. Now, Muslims have been invading Europe, Muslims have been invading Islamic lands, Christian lands, African lands for centuries. So from the start, they are an imperialist culture. They are also a very warlike culture. You look at the history. Within 3 years of Muhammad's death, 28 of the countries around Saudi Arabia, what we know as today Saudi Arabia, were invaded. They invaded, before the Crusades happened, they'd invaded 30 European countries. So who's invading who, right? And so no. The US, I know they love to say US imperialism, but no, the US is not an empire. It might be influential, but certainly it is not imperialist. It doesn't own countries. Now, of course, then there'll be other arguments, but as you look at the history, dissect them each one by one, put the facts in, you realize these arguments fall apart.
Right. Let's try it again. But isn't it racist to oppose Islam?
Islam's an ideology like Nazism. Islam is an ideology like communism or fascism, except that happens to have a deity at the head of it, but it's an ideology. Muslims are people, ideologies are ideas. How can you be racist towards an idea? Now, if you go to Chechnya, you're going to find blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white Muslims. So
it's true. I've been there. Yep,
right. True. So no, it's not a race, and it's an idea, and it's simply, again, that falls to. Now look, there are three main methods that should we call them the ideologists, the propagandists, the jihadis, the communists are utilizing to prevent engagement with their ideas and to shame people into submission. And oddly, it comes back to submission, which is what Islam is.
What Islam is, yes.
Right, submission to the will of Allah. So the three main methods are shame,
which is most used.
You do not defend what you are ashamed of. Amnesia, you cannot draw inspiration from what you have forgotten or what you do not know. And the third is irrationality. Destroy logic by means of rhetoric, by means of emotion, so that
repeated sophistry.
Exactly. So that evidence becomes
fuzzy, becomes
irrelevant.
Yes.
Right. So irrationality, amnesia, and shame. And shame and amnesia are very common. So if you don't know the facts, if you don't know the history, like the Crusades, right? The Crusades were the result of, After 500, over 500 battles by Islamic jihadis during the Islamic Crusades against Christendom, what was called Christendom at the time, where they invaded all of these countries. They fought over 500 battles, and eventually in Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Empire called for help from the Roman Empire and said, look, from the Roman Church, and said, look, Catholic Church then, we need help. We've been invaded for 450 years. So after 462 years, if I have it correct, of over 500 battles and invasions, finally something like 15 battles were fought to try to just hold on to Christendom. At that time, Rome had been invaded twice by Muslims. Half of Italy, the southern half of Italy, had no people living in it because it was occupied, like Spain was. There was no one living within 100 kilometers of the Italian coast because they'd kidnapped all the women, taken them into slavery, into bondage. Nearly 2 million, 1.5 million white people from Europe were taken to Africa as slaves by these Islamic slave traders. At least that number. Okay, Islamic slave trade they ran the largest slave trade in history.
Now there's amnesia right there.
Yeah.
Nobody talks about that.
And there is no shame from this culture, whereas the West cannot fall over its feet fast enough to apologize. So you have over 500 battles, and people complain about, well, you did 15 battles to save your culture. Well, yeah.
After half a millennia.
After 462 years, maybe a little pushback was called for. This is after Rome. Jerusalem was sacked. After Rome was attacked. After Spain was invaded. After France was invaded. Poland was invaded. You name the country. 30 European countries were invaded. And finally someone said, okay, well, we're going to fight you now. I think that's a good idea. So if it wasn't for the pushback that held these people at bay for 200 years, allowing Europe time to breathe and gather their forces, all of Europe would be Islamic. And now
probably we would be having this conversation from Dar al-Islam.
Correct. And they've lost 70% of what was Christian lands. All of North Africa, all of the churches. You look at the New Testament where you've got the letters to Antioch and all, every single one of those countries is now a Muslim country, an Islamic land. So Syria was the first Christian country, no longer. So we've lost 70% of those countries. And I imagine those were Christian countries like Europe, or Christian based or of a Christian heritage. They would be very different today than they are, being Islamic countries. You'd have Europe and America spread much further around the world. That culture, unfortunately, has been destroyed, and now we're allowing these people in.
Why? You mentioned this fact about the Islamic slave trade. How come it has become almost entirely forgotten? I mean, we learned about it in school in Eastern Europe, but that's because, at least in Eastern Europe, it's still not yet anyway, any shame about the historical fights of our peoples against the Ottoman Empire. But generally, I mean, when I mentioned this to a history, a chap studying to get a history degree in the United States, when I mentioned this, I got a blank stare. They're like, "Oh, we never heard about that." How did this happen, and how can it be? Can it be turned around?
I think there's a great deal of trauma that happened to the Western psyche, to the European psyche, based on these centuries of humiliation, of defeat, of rape and slavery that happened to the West.
You mean at an epigenetical level?
That may be the case, but I think this is just something so traumatic people don't want to think about it. But I think we need to open up that wound. We need to look at it. Also, from a very practical standpoint, again, amnesia. You cannot orient yourself to what's happening in your life if you don't have information. And this is about denial of the critical image of the enemy. So let's take, for instance, just to provide an example, to provide clarity. So how much funding are the Islamic nations putting into Western universities? Let's take an example.
Billions and billions and billions.
So in the last 18 months, if I recall, looking at the figures I've seen recently, Israel, everyone talks about the Jews, right, as a huge threat. They funded 8 US universities in the last 18 months to the tune of $13.5 million. Qatar alone has funded $377 million. Now, I'm sure that's
about 12 times more than Israel.
It's at least double 13 million. Okay.
Sorry, not 10 times, 32 times. Somewhere around.
So as you know, I grew up in Africa, so I attended a school for emotionally disturbed teachers. It's definitely had an effect on my so that was a joke. So that is Qatar alone. This is not even including what Saudi Arabia spends, which is an even greater amount. Now, if someone gave you $400 million, you might just sing to their tune. You might just forget certain subjects. You might just like the fact that they've just bought you a Porsche. And you might write and say nice things and not go into these little awkward historical facts that they don't want you to look at. You might just support their agenda. I think that's something to look at. So I think there's one is the case of this trauma, and two is the case of actual active effort to prevent examination of the history.
Terrible. You mentioned earlier in passing that that most of the Jew hatred that we see on the internet is coordinated.
Yeah.
Can you get a little bit more into that?
Okay, so we've done several episodes. We've done 4 episodes specifically on this, that I've done anyway, which are available on YouTube. People can look at this, where we've deconstructed this in detail, in very fine detail. Now, what we're finding is there's a coordinated push by a very small group of people. There's a handful of funders. I don't know if I should name them right now. We do discuss them online, but I'll avoid it in this example, perhaps. Just one of these people is a wealthy American billionaire that we've discovered actually funds these efforts to demonize Jews online, and this would conform to the early stages of genocide. Now, genocide is a term that's thrown around a lot, but the end stage is where there's killing. There's several stages prior where it starts with demonization, humiliation, and it builds. The creator of the term genocide actually regrets the definition as he created it. He's now redefined it, but it hasn't caught on. He calls the end stage democide as a separate issue. Genocide is really the erasure, the lying, the removal of the symbols and the words and the history. So there's been a genocide in terms of the culture, right? There's an attempt to erase the culture, to lie about what's happened to them, to remove their symbolism, things that they identifies of the culture, and impose new identities.
Remove them from public life.
Yes, correct. So that's genocide, really. So we've discovered there's a handful of funders who are paying a very small handful of people that we've, at least in our context, in our circle, to incite hordes. They've got several groups, and these hordes go online to attack anyone who discusses anything about Israel, who discusses anything positively about the Jews, who discusses anything related to Islam versus the Jews and so on. You'll find lots of nominal Christians, supposed Christians defending Islam and trying to pinpoint everything on Jews, and we've taken this apart in detail. The lies about the Talmud, the blatant lies and misquotes and fake quotes about the Talmud, history, the U.S. is liberty. What about we're going to do an episode on that soon, where I'll be discussing the detail of the USS Liberty. And my question is, why do they always say, what about the USS Liberty, as an example, and never actually provide detail? Why when they quote the Talmud, the Talmud says the Jews can rob Gentiles. Why don't you actually quote the entire paragraph?
Where? In what context?
Just quote me the whole paragraph, because the Talmud is a law book. It's a commentary on the Bible. People may have heard of the Bible. Right?
Maybe.
It's a commentary on the Bible. So ultimately, when they attack the Jews, they're attacking Christian morality. They're attacking Western morality, Western values. They're trying to destroy the morality of the Bible. Who has a vested interest in it? Well, the communists do, and the Muslims do. Islam has a vested interest in doing those things. So we've been tackling this, and I think we're having surprisingly, we've discovered we're having an effect, a very positive effect.
Yeah, one way I bait people a lot is when I keep on using this phrase, the Judeo-Christian civilization, which for some reason keeps on having a lot of triggering effects on people.
I agree with you there. I've seen people want to deny that link. There's lots of commentators online who want to deny that link. The thing is that you had Christians believe in that Bible, and the Jews are the substance of the first part of that Bible. And then Jesus was a Jew, he died a Jew, the apostles were all Jews. The authors of the New Testament, except for Luke, were all Jews. They all lived as Jews, they died as Jews. They were inside a Jewish environment, Jewish culture. They brought a Jewish mindset and a Jewish experience to their writing. So their morality was Jewish. Now so this is it's an indirect means of attacking Christian morality, creating shame, that people won't defend these things. So I think once we start to understand and put these things in clear context, it creates it identifies the lies in the lies, and it arms people who want to fight back, and I think people do. And I think I am starting to see that. And sure, again, this is coordinated by a handful of people who are funding a small group of people to incite a large group of people who really just have talking points and very little by way of facts and details, and we go for details.
Yeah, so you're essentially saying be precise in your language and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
But why does this kind of incitement work?
It's moral. Again, it comes down to it's the right thing. It's moral, right? Look at victimology at the moment. You're looking at this whole victimhood ideology. You are oppressed and you're fighting against the oppressor, so you are justified. Now, none of it's true, and all of it's based on ignorance. All of it's based on lying. And I'm saying this as a black guy, coming from Africa, growing up in Africa, living there, and my life changed when I realized that I was being deceived by propaganda, and I adopted a better set of ideas. These people are trying to provide you with a set of ideas that are really based on resentment, and they want you to tear down a successful culture so they can impose their culture because they're jealous. They feel that the only way a culture is successful is if it steals from someone else. Well, I was successful. I robbed nobody, right? I simply followed a set of good ideas. So education system has been infiltrated. If you're looking at, like I said, the amount of money that Saudi is spending, Qatar is spending, Kuwait is spending,
yes,
etc., other countries, they're spending huge amounts of money to implant their values. So people feel they're doing the right thing, they feel they're aligning with other people who are part of it, and they're just being duped.
And it's such a large scale that when you put it in these words, it is very easy for what is nominally and wrongly known as reasonable observers to just dismiss it as an outright conspiracy.
A lot of those reasonable observers are probably just propagandists in their own right.
That's why I said, what may be known and wrongly known
look, people know there's a problem. People know there's something different about Islam. Communism was openly discussed and promoted on the presidential debate stage in the US. Clearly, they are effective. They're getting somewhere. So Eastern Europe is somewhat resistant to this because they lived under these systems, both of them in the past. They are clearly resistant to them because they have experience of them. You have a generation that has no experience of this in the West because it's done so well. It's been so safe. Right?
Yes, and also, and I'm sorry for interrupting, but
Sure.
as the people who've lived through the communist era in Poland, in Hungary, in Romania, in Ukraine, Bulgaria, and so on and so forth, as the generation that was mature enough to understand the evil of communism while they were alive, as that generation dies off or retires, the newer generation is much more in sync with the West, essentially, which is increasingly communistic. And I've noticed this a little bit.
Well,
in
again, it's not
Warsaw
organic.
as well.
It's a propaganda. It's a propaganda effort to get them to adopt this. Now, unfortunately, one thing I think that is happening is that if you look at the American ethos, it's of the individual, the strong individual. This, I think, has been turned on people as a weapon so that they cannot unite against the collectivists. The collectivists are the Borg. They're mindless drones most of the time. They're working for script. So people do need to unite. However, on the flip side, now how we do that, there might have to be some crazy event that creates that unity. However, we don't have a single flag to rally around. Now, in communism, I guess they have a certain central theme they're rallying around, equality of all man, which is a moral goal. Islam has Islam to rally around.
We can have a big ummah.
Yeah, we don't have in the West a single flag anymore, and I think it's not a coincidence that as Christianity declines, Islam and communism rise. People want to believe. Now the church has been demonized, the church has been subverted, and also a lot of shame has been created, so people won't turn to that, and they will turn inside, and they will then isolate themselves from the world because they'd rather develop their own beliefs. Well, I'm Wiccan today, or yes, it happens.
Absolute heresy.
Or they will, because part of the aim is to create frustration. When you lose trust in your government, you start to isolate yourself. You start to fragment. That's a direct consequence. It's a direct psychological consequence of a loss of trust in leadership. You become frustrated, you take it out on yourself, and you start to then want to tear down the government. So then they will give you a message, well, tear down the government, it's bad. Well, oddly enough, it's not in the government's interests for you to distrust and work against the government, at least if you have a good government. So who's giving you that message and telling you to tear down what actually is a good government? Go spend some time in Africa and then tell me why you're complaining when you're living in Poland, because dude, you have no idea what you're talking about. No idea. And yeah, so I think the idea is that they've taken, and people are too proud now. We stand alone. I'll do, and also in America, for instance, I hear, well, when they come, I've got my guns. Well, if you could have stopped them by just posting on Facebook a little bit, or making a few YouTube comments and getting the facts out there and pushing back socially, defending your culture and putting the facts out for other people to read, maybe that would have been better than having to wait until the bullets stage. You know, I think, that's waiting too late. So when you don't have the facts, well, you hunker down, and of course this just allows them to push that line and encroach. So I would want people to understand what it is. And sorry, there's a point I wanted to make, that we don't need many. You actually don't need many people. The collectivists have to be sworn because they're not very smart. And they're not very well informed.
So they have to compensate by huge numbers.
Correct. Whereas we can actually, just a few willing people, willing to just speak up, armed with a little bit of facts, and I've got the database to share, and I'm happy to share it. You can win. Seriously, 1 against 100, you'll win.
Why? I mean, I understand why the collectivists wanted this to be the case, but what I don't understand is why otherwise reasonable, or at the very least not stupid people, have fallen for this, in the sense that they're no longer willing, they don't even try to defend
well, again, shame and ignorance of. Okay, so I'll use this example. Something I've noticed, and I've also was tracking for many years, and I do track these arguments and how they mutate and evolve. I've seen arguments mutate and evolve in response to me defeating some of their arguments. Within 72 hours, less than 72 hours, responses out. I've seen it happen worldwide. The same argument verbatim around the globe. That doesn't happen without central coordination. That is centrally managed. But for instance, the idea of Christianity has been redefined to be moral cowardice. Well, Christ wants you to just roll over or bend over and give the guy some vase. At least
not exactly how reality works.
Yeah, I know, but understand. But there's the idea of, well, Christ wants you to just be meek and mild and be a pushover.
Turn the other cheek.
Turn the other, yeah. In fact, bend over and offer him some vase with it. Excuse my French there, but really, this is, whereas, so they and people are confused about what that message was. Sure, in a religious sense, one thing; in a secular sense, a different thing. That's Christianity is not a suicide pact, right? There's give to Caesar as well. So, and Caesar says, well, defend your culture. Right, and also those cultures are antithetical to Western norms and Western values, so you have to defend them, or you are going to live under someone else's values. So there's the idea that, so we've been confused about what our values are and what we fight for. And also, amnesia, it really boils back down to amnesia, lack of information. You cannot draw from, well, you cannot orient, and which means define. You cannot identify friends or foes if you lack information. So you cannot orient on what's a threat, and they've removed that ability. So I think there needs to be a strong moral base, because these other people have a very strong moral. It might be wrong, might be upside down, but it's a moral base, and we need to redefine ours very specifically.
Yeah, but it has gotten much more difficult than in the past. Drawing from my own experience, 15 years ago, when I was delivering training to mostly young white men, it was easier than it is now. Discussing openly about the need for a moral framework, be it even a secular one. I mean, I'm an atheist myself. I understand the role of religion, and I prefer it to stay that way, because only under Christian culture are atheists safe. There is nowhere else on earth where atheists are safe, other than the Christian club. But 15 years ago it was easier. Today it has become almost shameful to discuss about the need for a moral framework, and it's getting increasingly harder. Can that be combated in an efficient way by few people? Because you mentioned that you don't even need
you don't need numbers.
Numbers, yes.
You just need a little bit of persistence. I mean, my team is tiny. We accidentally fell into this. There were two of us. We were joined by a third, and what we're finding is victory leads to inspiration. Just winning leads to other people to be inspired. So small victories eventually cascade, and lots of small victories equal that. So clearly, look, we're also facing lawfare. People are being intimidated on more than one front. It's not only being denied in terms of education to have the necessary facts and knowledge, but also you're seeing initiatives, for instance, the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Conference, through the UN, through the EU, implementing Islamic Sharia blasphemy laws to protect religion, but really to protect Islam. People are afraid to speak. You can now be arrested for a critical tweet. In the UK, in Germany, in Holland, and so on. People are being arrested. People are going to jail for these things, for simply being critical of immigration, for voicing criticism of government policy.
Or for even speaking the truth. I mean, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, he was told by the court that even though the statistics you quoted are absolutely true, you should not have quoted them in public as part of
Now that is a direct implementation of Islamic blasphemy law. It's called Ghibba. Okay, now if you read the most popular Sharia manual in the world, called Reliance of the Traveller, Umdat al-Salik, in section, I think it's G2.5, they talk about Ghibba. And this is, in Western law, slander is when someone lies about you, says things that are untrue, and thus you have a case against them. Islamic slander is where someone says things that are accurate and true about you, but you don't want them known. So they would cause you embarrassment if the truth were known. So this is a direct one-to-one correlation with the successful implementation through either the collaboration or the ignorance of these people in the UN, the EU, and so on. And these laws are coming. Now, I've been in various European countries. Finland was one of the worst. Germany also has the same problem. People realize the facts, they just can't talk about it. They'll talk about their children being molested at school, they'll talk about their children being attacked, they'll talk about the pools where their children are being harassed, and yet they cannot speak in front of others who even share the same opinion, because the risk is they will lose their jobs, lose their livelihoods, they would be socially ostracized. There are some serious consequences, and again, this is not organic. This is simply the truth, these are the facts. However, I think on the flip side again, because all these Islamic books are now in English, and I've done my best to make them available to everyone and explain them in detail, people are learning, and eventually there will be pushback. You can only push it so far before you, before you see a reaction.
Yeah, one of the great revelations of the last 3 or 4 years, even a few months before the Trump campaign started, so basically early 2015, late 2014, let's put it this way. One of the great revelations to many of us LARPing as political operatives was that the amount of people who already knew most of these things, but when I started doing things in English, because I've been doing this thing a lot longer in Romanian, but when I started doing it in English, the amount of emails that I would get, even as the channel was very small, was like, I knew these things, but I had no idea everyone else knew, or that there is anyone knowing them.
True.
This was this is one of the greatest revelations over the last 4 years. The amount of people who already know these things, but they just either they couldn't articulate them, either because they didn't know all the facts, or because they were ashamed or afraid of social ostracism, or they just simply assumed that they were the ones insane and everyone else.
Agreed. But again, that's been created. Remember, they've prepared the ground. This is a criminal act that you're seeing happening. They've prepared the ground and made it difficult for you to defend. They've been laying the ground long before they launched their attack. Take 9/11. 9/11 was the opening shot in a 21-year plan by Al-Qaeda. And the head of Al-Qaeda, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, is a Muslim Brotherhood operative. He's a member. Well, he's a Muslim brother. So people see one event, but this was the opening battle cry in the Ummah's plan, at least the ulama's plan, let's say, the leadership within the Islamic community, to start the supremacy of Islam again. And the reason they chose the 11th of September was the 11th of September was the day that Islam was the last day that Islam was supreme in Europe. And on September the 12th, at 4 a.m. in the morning of September 12th, that came crashing down when King Jan Sobieski of Poland slaughtered, destroyed the much, much larger Turkish army and sent them packing out of Europe. And that led to the immediate decline of the Ottoman Empire. So they want to go back to September 11th when they were supreme. They were the supreme force. So that date is symbolic simply because of the history. And so again, Jan Sobieski, September 11th, the Battle of Vienna, something people should look up. You know, so that was the symbolism behind that date. It was the opening shot of their new campaign. However, it was coordinated along with a psychological and propaganda warfare campaign. Notice immediately after Islam's religion of peace. Nihada Wadov.
That was not a talking point in 1997.
It was not. Nihada Wadov, one of the leaders of CARE, was standing right behind. If you look at the camera footage, he's standing right behind George Bush as George Bush says these words. So who fed them to him? Now, George Bush may have meant well. However, he made a critical error there. He really made a critical error there. And that has been, and to reverse that. So that is called information dominance. It's a US military term, right? A simpler term for lay people might be message dominance. But they've created the narrative now. And to work against that narrative is very hard. Now, for a narrative to be considered mainstream, it only has to be adopted by 10% of a particular group. Now, not 90%, just 10%. Now, what's interesting, if you take that one step forward, and I've been doing some research and thinking and experience of my own, you might think, oh, how do I get my message to 10% of the population? I'm just some guy sitting in a room in the internet. You know, I'm in
You're
a tiny
on the internet. That's already
in a tiny corner of the internet.
90% of the trouble has been solved already.
Well, here's the thing: in your community, for that knowledge to become mainstream within your context, your circle, you only need 10% of your circle. Don't try the whole country, just amongst your buddies. Convince one or two of your friends, and you're good. Then convince one or two people at work. Then convince one or two people at your church. Then convince one or two people in your soccer club. You know, you just need 10%. You don't have to do the whole country at once. Just so with the work we were doing that I accidentally fell into, and I mean the backlash was crazy, but it was fun in a way. Especially when we were kicking ass and taking names. When we realized how weak these people are, we discovered that they were a connected community, and what we did in our small corner of that community reverberated throughout the entire community. So if we just capture 10% of that community, we own that community. We've changed that message, we've flipped it. And that will have reverberations. That is going, so I don't think it's that hard to reach that tipping point.
Yeah, for more reference on that, see my older video called the 10% rule. I spoke about this on the channel. Yes, the 10% rule, I mean, it's been replicated in Iran. I mean, the Islamic Revolution didn't have more than 10%.
The Nazis weren't more than 10%.
Yeah, the Nazis weren't more than that. Although the way I framed it is that you need 10% radicals rather than 10% convinced.
Agreed.
Just to be fully sure that you'll be owning
committed.
this.
10%
yes.
committed.
Yeah, committed. Yes, not necessarily radicals, but committed.
So you don't need a majority. You're always outnumbered, but you're never outgunned.
Yes. So yeah, the thing is that, do you have any inside, maybe we'll compare notes even after we're shutting down the cameras, but how do you convince the individuals who are in those particular situations? Because it's easy to do this in Poland, or it's easy to do this in Hungary or in Romania, where realistically speaking the state is not going to come after you for discussing the things that we're discussing.
I think you can engage.
But how do you do this in Finland or in Sweden? 'Cause I'm more familiar with Sweden actually than Finland.
Look, that's a fair question. I don't live in those countries. However, facts are facts. They need less support than do false narratives, right? The facts are fairly visible. Now, of course, you're working against a lot of people who've been propagandized, who aren't able to even recognize the truth, who can't orient on the truth. Fine and well.
Demoralized.
Well, that's also a communist term, as far as I know. And so the first step of people view it as
Bismanov term. That's what I mean.
people view it as you are now depressed. No, you are. you have values that resist the values of the system that they're trying to impose. So they have to remove your values. That's the demoralization part, and they will remoralize you with the new set of values, so you will be compliant. Fine. So again, that's message dominance again, or information dominance. They've been very smart about this. They've had a century to do it, right? And they've got billions of dollars, but they can be deconstructed now. Okay, so anything worth doing is worth doing badly, right? Because not doing it is not an option. Start badly and you'll figure it out. You'll get better, right? Because it's worth doing badly until you get good at it. I started off badly. I got my ass handed to me a few times until I figured out A, I don't like losing, and B, I've collected data, I've collected information. Every defeat was a victory because it taught me how they operate. It taught me their methods. It taught me their arguments. I went back and I deconstructed those arguments. Take the time. So within your context, if you try, you'll find something. People are in your corner. People need someone to speak out. Now, you don't have to ruin your life, but go online, go on forums, even if you have to use a VPN, have an account. Do things, speak up, make your voice heard. It counts. You'd be amazed how it can inspire people. Talk about some of these issues. Find the way that you can talk about it. There will be ways and means, and eventually no dictatorial government has lasted, at least not in the West. Islam, unfortunately, is a form of government. It's a very small percentage religion, and in fact initially it's religion, but eventually it imposes its form of military control and government, right? It's a military, religious, totalitarian government system, really. That again, something I cover in my series online, but Islam is different though. Islam is different. Countries struggle to throw this off. It is extremely hard, and this is a critical struggle. You need to fight back. Now look, we don't know how. It might be new territory, but someone has to be the pioneer, and we're finding great success. And yeah, look, it's a tough issue, but you cannot give up. Here's the thing though, despair is something they are trying to force upon us. The whole point of their assault is to create that despair. And that allows them to win.
Create the illusion of inevitability.
Well, my friends and I, we tackled arguments that were invincible. And when we destroyed those arguments with facts, with data, right, we showed that these people, these lies, they had feet of clay. They had nothing. They had no legs to stand on. They were paper tigers. We set fire to them. Now all they can do is fight a rearguard action. And just the fact of getting some of these people, look, there will be a weakness somewhere. There's always a weakness. There's always a weakness. Push, find, look. You will find a way. And they will retreat. And as they retreat, their confidence is sapped. Utilize their own methods against them, their own psychology against them. Their confidence will sap, and others will be inspired. Believe in your creativity. Believe that you can get the results, because they want you to feel isolated. They want you to feel despair.
Yeah, it is something that I think I mentioned a few years ago. It's the myth of inevitability. Communists were trying the same thing, essentially feeding despair amongst the dissenters, saying that communism is inevitable. It's the logical conclusion of history. So that turned out to be bullshit, of course.
Yeah.
But a similar type of messaging is now, diversity is the future. It's probably everyone going to be under a Dar al-Islam or a quasi-secular Dar al-Islam version. And when I'm like, I don't know about that. I've heard that narrative before and turned out to be wrong.
No, the communists have been successful. They've imposed communism on over 30 countries, and they failed in every instance. However, those jihadis who want to impose Islam on the world, who are really working hard, have learned from the communists. They're copying those methods. They're successful methods. They're copying them, and of course they adapt them to the Sharia, but they will also utilize proxies. So they're working very hard. Dar al-Islam, for those who don't know, essentially classical Islam divides the world into the Dar al-Islam, the house of Islam, the house of submission to Allah, and the Dar al-Harb. The Dar al-Harb is the house of war. Yeah. We live in the house of war. Yeah. Now, not that we're warring on them. See, we are warring on Islam in the sense that we refuse to accept Allah. This is a violation. And the Muslims who are adherent to the Sharia have to fight us to make us accept Islam, to make us submit. So, and then you will have peace. And they redefine words. The idea of peace is that once they've conquered the entire world and imposed Islam and Sharia, then we will have peace. Okay? So they've redefined words like mercy and peace and justice and all sorts of things. So understand, they're not using the same terms of reference as you are. Yeah, again, do a little bit of reading. There's plenty of information, but be creative. You know, this, and they really want to destroy everything that you hold dear. It's a very important fight. I think we can win this. I think we're still at a point we can win it. But once it gets to the point when the bullets are being fired, well, it's a little late in the game. Let's try to prevent it from getting to that point.
Yeah, Lebanon, for instance, kept it very, very well until the bullets started firing.
I've been to Lebanon.
Yes.
That was an eye-opener for me. That really gave me perspective when you realize that the birth rate is how they effectively took the country. Right? Yeah. It's a Catholic country, and yet just through the birth rate. And now it's a very tenuous sort of alliance and peace. And yeah, it's scary what happened then, how the country declined because of Islam. And it was like the paradise, you know, the Paris of the Middle East.
Yes.
Just like Cuba before communism, you know, in so many places. South Africa before the ANC.
Nowadays, Paris is the Beirut of Europe.
Sadly, yeah.
Beirut used to be the Paris of the Middle East, and now it's probably the other way around. Although, well, actually, yeah, it's a fair comparison, because the level of violence is starting to be comparable. In Beirut has gone a little bit lower, but in Paris has gotten so much higher. That they're now comparable. Have you gotten any kind of attacks on, how should I frame this, on identitarian grounds? Because whilst I don't particularly care, I'm sure you know the modern left is all about racial identitarian kind of stuff. So, you know, when someone like you shows up, that's a meltdown on the left.
Well, look,
almost always.
I'm an anomaly in that sense. I mean, I lived in Africa. I have a Western education. I have mixed family. So I grew up with two different sets of cultural values, and I grew up with two sets of eyes. So when something happens around me, I see it from an African point of view as well as a European point of view at the same time, and it's amazing the distinction between the two. And I would say that from an African point of view, it is less cultured, it is more predatory. Right? I say this honestly, that's the African mind. It's less developed socially, right? And this is the kind of attitude that whoever these social engineers are that want to destroy the West, they need people who are disruptive, and that kind of thinking is disruptive. That's why they need to bring these people over. That's why they need this kind of influence that cannot be reasoned with as well, that doesn't comply with the law and with the social norms. Now, yes, I've been called, you name the name, I have been called it. I'm a race traitor, I'm a nogger.
Are you a coon as well?
Oh, coconut, Oreo, monkey, you name it. Okay, I've been called it. I've been called plenty of, and this is from the tolerant, non-racist left.
Not just the tolerant, anti-racist left.
And you know, who are happy to tell me just what they think of me in color terms. Okay, so fine and well. I mean, that the weird thing is, I don't get this from Republicans. I don't get this from conservatives. I don't get it from, you know,
the allegedly evil racists.
Yeah, I don't. It doesn't happen. You know, the moment I show a willingness, you know, growing up, maybe I can digress slightly and give some background perspective.
Sure.
Growing up, I had an opportunity to go to a good school, and the resistance to this opportunity, now it meant sacrifice. It meant years of classes to qualify me to even just write an exam. So I had to go 3 years of classes, 3 days a week, just to qualify to write an exam.
To attend the exam, yes.
Just to write the exam, and that wasn't an easy exam. And then once I wrote the exam and I got accepted, and I had to get a certain level through all those years, right? Certain amount of attendance, certain amount of pass. Then I still had to do an additional year, right? While at school, right? So I went to one of the best schools, and the white people around me who saw that I had ambition, that I wanted more, were incredibly helpful towards me. They did everything they could to help me. Where I got pushback was black people. because now I was going counter to the culture. I was essentially rejecting the culture. I was joining the enemy. And I was also rejecting the culture of my community, right? And I was also showing an ethic that they lacked. And this is embarrassing to them. This shows that they could succeed if they put in the effort. But also they were clinging to ideas of these people are bad, and I am now, I'm painted as selling out, but I was called all sorts of things. You're trying to be white. No, I'm trying to be educated. I'm trying to get out of here. And black people are taught from an early age essentially to embrace their culture, but this is really a trap. It means that you don't develop, you don't evolve. Not that white people are necessarily more sophisticated, they just have better ideas. They've adopted over time better ideas. And to be black,
and at huge costs. I mean, these ideas didn't come out of nothing.
And black people, to be black is
Capital B, black.
Is to cling to ideas that prevent you from adopting these ideas, because we're just as good, or we're smarter, we're better, or they cheated, or whatever. There's all sorts of excuses and reasons, but these ideas are what cause black culture to fail, keeps black culture back, right? And if they give up these ideas and adopt these ideas, for all intents and purposes, these black people are white people. They may as well be white then, because they think the same way and they will achieve the same success, right? But they are so busy with their identity politics that they remember, they cannot adopt these ideas, because then that proves their ideas wrong. So that would be humiliating and embarrassing. So this traps them, and this has been used very effectively by people to create that, to create that silo and to dig that hole and keep them in it, to fight for their identity, rather than, these are crappy ideas, we need to adopt those ideas and we'll have the same success. How come Mexico doesn't just copy America? That would be smart. Right? How hard would that be? But no, we're Mexican, we do stupid things in a stupid way.
Chile did, and ended up being one of the most successful countries in the
so
history
they do
of
dumb things in a
mankind.
dumb way and get bad results, and they wonder why, and they're like, how about you do what those guys are doing? But no, we're different to them. We do inferior things in an inferior way. So I've been, people have tried to shame me, but I realize the power of these good ideas. If I behave like a lot of the peers I grew up with, I would never be sitting in the boardrooms I sat in. I would never be sitting with ministers of defense, with the heads of the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, talking to them about national defense issues. I would never have been where I got.
Anywhere near close to that, yeah.
You know?
What's more interesting, as you were explaining, is that I saw this dynamic both in Africa and in the United States. It just seems to keep on following. It doesn't, for instance, Botswana has gotten significantly better as the country overall, and the people within the country have adopted more and more, not necessarily European, but Western, Judeo-Christian type of values in terms of, not just in terms of culture, but also in terms of economics and so on and so forth. Whereas South Africa has gotten worse over the same period, as it has adopted more of an identitarian black type of
well, they're becoming tribalist, right?
Yes.
And these to be blunt, the tribes hate each other. They were part of the genius of apartheid, now I know we're not supposed to say things like that, but is that the tribes were killing each other in droves. Apartheid just means apartness. How about we put you boys over there, we put you boys over there, we live in the middle, you don't see each other, no more violence, no more dead bodies. Winning. Simple. That was part of the reason. No one stopped to think about that. So part of it was a necessity. The black tribes were murdering each other. Shaka Zulu and Mzilikazi murdered half of the population of the country in the 1830s and 1840s. They killed over 2 million people. Who stopped that? The evil white people did. Right? They rescued half the country. They were going to murder everybody, and you don't get that in the history books. You don't hear that in school.
Absolutely haram to talk about these things in public.
Correct. Correct. It is haram to talk about it. So you don't get that. So again, that's amnesia and shame, right? And now we have again the militant, aggressive competitiveness of the tribal system, where the tribes are now fighting for possession. It's not about logic, it's just about supremacy, it's about dominance. And this is where we're going back to that kind of mind. And this mind has been imported into the West. These ideas have been foisted upon the West. The idea that everything is the same. No, it's not the same. Okay, poop doesn't smell as good as chocolate cake, right? They're not the same thing, right? And those things are poop, right? And we need to really, unfortunately, change them, right? Those ideas will take us back to the Stone Age. They kept those cultures in the Stone Age for 40,000 years. And I didn't move to Europe to have those ideas follow me here.
That kind of speech that you just delivered would put you in tremendous trouble in Germany. It would put you in tremendous trouble in Sweden, for sure. Not so much in the United States. They still have First Amendment over there. But slowly these kinds of facts are either completely obliterated from the history books, or they're increasingly harder to find. So that's why work such as the work you've been doing lately is very, very helpful. So you still haven't provided an answer to my question. How do you nudge individuals who could be doing similar work, or either helping either of us or creating their own thing, that they keep on being, well, maybe some other time, or well, maybe it's not worth it.
Speak up on Facebook, make small comments. It's not hard. Do little things. Little things lead to bigger things, but it inspires. You never know who is going to inspire. You never know. So don't give ground.
I learned that the hard way.
Don't let it encroach. Do not let it encroach. It is encroaching. So a small word here and a small word there is all it needs. You never know who's going to be inspired by your words. And these things, a trickle leads to a flood. It's really as simple as that. Know the facts. So inform yourself. Get educated. The facts are available. We've made them available to everyone in fine detail. You can back up your argument. We understand how that flow of their argument works. And seriously, they run out of facts eventually. They're on a script. They run out of facts. And we don't. We don't. I have hundreds of pages of counter arguments based on historical data. So just speak up. Be willing to say a few words. But here's another thing. We need a flag to rally around. And unfortunately, and I've done this on an academic level. I've been dealing with various sources and people and organizations. And unfortunately, the one thing that we are going to rally around, the one rallying cry, the one place, the one flag is the church and Christianity. Unfortunately, now of course these have been under assault for a long time, but those Christian values, because ultimately they're attacking moral values, and the arbiter of Christian values is not the lab, it is not MIT, it is the church. Okay, it's not science. My apologies to those who are firm believers in science, but if my mom dies and I go to her funeral, I don't want to have a lecture on decomposition as the high piece of this service. You understand? No one wants to hear that. They want to hear some uplifting, inspiring words and a few pages out of the book on decomposition, how the worms are going to eat your mom and how long this takes and the gases that will be released. We're not interested. Okay, the arbiter of those moral values is the church. Now sure, there's some bad churches and there are bad priests, just like there are bad dentists. Okay, but there are good ones. And if you do some basic study, read the Bible a little bit, learn about your culture, learn your history, know your history, and you will then know what it is you need to defend. It'll be very clear to you where you can make an impact, where you need to speak up. Some things you can let slide. Someone else will pick that up. But you can make a difference in small ways, and this adds up. Believe me, it adds up. That's what they've been doing. And we can do the very same thing right back. And we can be more effective. We don't need as many, and we have the facts.
Yes, and probably the most difficult part to explore, or what I found the most difficult part to explain, is you don't even need necessarily to be a practicing Christian.
No.
Because the point is not to defend necessarily the ritual in the case of the both Catholic and Orthodox Church. It's not to defend the ritual per se, but just to defend the idea of it and the ideas that underpin that particular civilization. It doesn't. That's why, for instance, I have very little interest in. But that guy is that kind of Protestant, and that guy is a Serb Orthodox and a Ukrainian Orthodox. I don't give a shit.
I would say a lot of that fragmentation is also not organic necessarily. It's designed to create this friction and disunity.
Yeah, one thing that most people don't know is that Luther came back to church towards the end of his life when he saw what happens when you allow the plebs to rewrite their own rules.
The history of Luther. Oh my gosh, no, not that guy. So that's a story for a different day.
No heresy, please.
So, but we need a single rallying cry, and these people have. So we need one as well. And libertarianism, no, conservatism, 1878 conservatism, no, 1776, no. Seriously, lose the debate. Unfortunately, this is it has a religious component to it. The communists have an anti-religious drive. The atheists, the militant atheists, have an anti-religious drive. They're not atheists, they're anti-theists.
Anti-theists, yes.
And the Islamic creed calls for the subjugation and the killing of Christians and Jews, right?
Especially non-believers.
Oh yeah, correct. And those who do not believe are not.
As Christian or as a Jew, there's still the option to pay jizya, to be a dhimmi. As an atheist, there's only off with your head.
Correct.
Or being stoned to death. There's still a choice over it.
So that's Ridda. So this is the only central point. And the thing is that, as I said, it's no coincidence that as Christianity declines, these other things rise. If this became predominant, if those values, those Western values, our justice system and our moral system, our sense of fairness is based out of this, and they've been inverted, they've been altered, they've been twisted, right? So a simple thing would be to grab the New Testament and just read it. Just do that. Get an idea of what are the ideas that shaped your culture. Become in touch with those again, and that'll inform you of your history and your values, and that gives you a basis to operate from. That's a really good start, because it gives you a platform to work from, to identify what's important, what's not important. That really, I think, would be a central point. And a few words here and a few words there, it adds up. I started doing it, others have done it, people are doing it. I'm seeing the results online now. We used to see 95% pushback, 98% pushback against us in comment sections. Now we're getting 50, 60, 70, 80% pushback against these bad guys, the bad actors, the swarm. We used to be, we were outnumbered heavily. Now it's the tide
will probably always be outnumbered, but it really does matter whether.
But the tide is turning. The tide is turning, and in comparison, when we put facts down, and these people come with their rhetoric, they look stupid. They really, but any reasonable person looking at that, making the comparison, is going to go, these people are idiots.
Utopianism has been.
We are one law away from no more gun killings. You know that.
Yes. The reason I'm bringing up utopianism is because oftentimes, not just myself, but many of us within the Freedom Alternative Network, and I'm sure many of your people have stumbled upon this as well, with this kind of pushback of like, oh, but if we're, particular libertarian idea or particular conservative idea, well, but they still have these issues, and explaining to people that, look, man is fundamentally flawed, or from a religious perspective, man is fundamentally fallen. There is no such thing as perfect ideas. There is no such thing as perfect societies. Yes, there is always going to be gun violence. There's always going to be knife violence. There's always going to be all of that nonsense, all of that terrible things. But there is a question of how much of it. Because as it turns out, in a relatively conservative, relatively Christian society, there is a lot less of it.
So let's look at some statistics. Statistics are good. Now, let's look at I'll go back to the apartheid era. This was 1949 to 1983 or so. 1993. 1993. So I mean, roughly, depends where you want to pull the date. When the ANC was legalized or when they took government control, etc. I mean, that roughly a 50-year period, 41-year, 50, 45-year period, whatever, just over 40 years. As I recall, there were a total of 7,300 murders between 1949 and 1991 in South Africa under the apartheid government.
You get those numbers per year now, probably even more.
Now, so the first year that the ANC government took power, there were 25,000 murders.
There you go. Yes.
So nearly a 4 times increase in 1 year. The ANC themselves killed 40,000 people between 1989 and 1993 to gain political control. They were competing with Inkatha Freedom Party under Mangosuthu Buthelezi, who was a peaceful man, very smart, very educated, wise man. But he held a majority that was more than double the size of the ANC, so they killed his members. They intimidated them into silence. They killed them, they drove them away, they made them afraid. The ANC embarked on a campaign of murder, killing 40,000 people just to gain power, when they already were a legal organization. They introduced chaos into the country. This is standard communist practice. right? Within the first 4 years of Mandela's presidency, 100,000 murders occurred. So we went from 7,000, which was genocide by the white man
in 50 years.
In 50 years, to 100,000 in the first 4 years of the ANC government. Now we get 20, 30,000 murders a year. How is this an improvement? How is this better? You know, there have been at least 75,000 white people killed since the ANC gained government power in 1994. Now you're looking at maybe 7,000 black people that died for whatever reasons during the preceding 20th century. How is this justified? This is more than 10 times the number of deaths. We're losing farmers and we're cutting our own industrial capacity in farms. Now, a little bit of history and people want to always justify things because they don't have the history. They think, oh, it's justified. Look what the whites did. Well, actually, if you start to look at the history, it doesn't look like you say it looks. Then either you're a liar or you're a dupe. Decide which one you are, right?
We can deal with dupes.
So, I mean, just some brief history. The white settlers had settled half of the territory that became South Africa. Remember, we only became a country in 1948, right? They had settled half of the territory that became that country and they'd been there for 125 years before they found their first black tribes, right? They found smatterings of some of the Bushmen, the Khoikhoi. And the Bushmen had been in the Stone Age for 50,000 years. Now, I like flush toilets and electricity. Okay, I don't think deer skins and sand for tissue paper are effective substitutes for what I have today. All right, you must be really comfortable, and that's an excuse that people use a lot. Or maybe you just have a really deficient culture to be stuck in the Stone Age for 50,000 years, right? So, and while certainly I know there are incidents, historical records of like 1,000 kilometers from the central government, there were some killings, but by white people who killed some of the to get their land and so on, make farms. That certainly has happened. However, that doesn't compare to the 2 million slaughtered by the blacks who killing the blacks, which was stopped by the whites. A few dozen, doesn't compare. But also, so they'd settled the country, they developed it. Now the interior of the country was unlivable. It had flies, it had the tsetse fly, they had sleeping sickness, mosquitoes. It was arid. The white people developed the interior of the country. They redirected rivers, they built dams, they built farms where people had only lived in the coastal zone. They'd taken land that had been uninhabited for thousands of years.
And uninhabitable.
And made it habitable. So who owns that? Does some black guy from Nigeria own it? Because all of the black tribes that are predominant in the country today are from Nigeria and Cameroon.
Cameroon, yes.
Right? So they traveled south and they started slaughtering everything in their path when they murdered the indigenous people, right? And the indigenous people ran to the white man for help and protection. So who owns that country? Besides, these people were there. They went from the Stone Age to the Stone Age, in the time that they had, and white people built cities, right? So you had a culture that didn't build harbors, didn't build ships, had no navigation, no shoes, no underwear, no toilet paper, no irrigation, barely could farm, barely knew what farming was. Okay, they were a warlike race. Now, if a warlike race prides itself on its warring ability and gets its ass handed to them, you lost. Deal with it. That was your value. You got beaten by a better culture. Well, tough, right? You have no grounds to complain, and that was their culture. We were a warlike. Well, you lost. Deal with it. Now, so I would rather have these cultures are violent, but on the face of it, they will make war upon outsiders, what they perceive. Now, who did more for the country? Who built the country up better? Who would have been a better example to follow? Do we really... These people didn't invent writing, didn't have books, don't even know what paper is, right? They produced no philosophers or music or anything of note. Didn't build anything over one story that wasn't made out of sticks, right? No, I mean, this is not something that you value as more important than people who build, huge civilizations that produce comfort for people. There's no hospitals, no schools, no universities, no learning, nothing. How do you compare that and say this is the equal? No, it's not. I'm sorry, in practical terms, it is not. We need to really understand our history, our values, and have the facts get the facts, you will find your courage, because the facts will tell you, this is who my ancestors were, this is who I am, this is who my people are, this is my heritage, this is worth fighting for. That's what's been taken away from you. For the reason that if you don't know what it is, you can't fight for it. You don't know what you're fighting for. And you don't know what you're fighting against. Do some reading and you will know who you are and who you stand against. And you'll find a way, right? But you need that. And you are fighting against the Borg. They are not going to be kind to you. And I can tell you now, the culture that I come from, having seen, I was in Germany and people saying, well, you're like one of the Zulus, right? No, I'm not tribal, right? That's not my people, that's not my culture. And I said, well, that makes you Turkish. Because I said, Turkey is closer to Germany than Zululand is to where I live in South Africa. And they were like, no, I'm not. I was like, yeah, well, look at geographical distance, right?
Do you people even geography?
So anyway, I'm like, no, I don't identify with those people. They're my countrymen, certainly. I respect them for that purpose, but that culture I don't respect. No, I can't. A culture that has shown no advantages in history, right? We need to stop coddling that. We need to say, look, our culture is better. At some point, you need to start making these distinctions, discriminate in that fashion. This is better. I can tell the difference. That's what discrimination means. To tell the difference, to separate.
Yeah, right. For that, see my older video from December 31st, 2016, called "Is Discrimination Really That Bad?"
And again, that also
I argued for discrimination and got a lot of flack for it.
Again, it's message dominance or information dominance, and also it's a necessary military term. You need to discriminate friend from foe, and they're applying military doctrine. And so if we know what doctrine they're applying, we can counter that doctrine, because it's actually paint by the numbers doctrine, because they're dealing with idiots to apply it. So you can literally paint by the numbers yourself and you will beat their asses. It's not that hard.
Yes, the reason I started this with utopianism is because oftentimes when I tell people very similar things that we just mentioned, not necessarily in relation to South Africa, but in general, and say, look, our culture is worth defending and so on and so forth. One of the arguments that I get particularly from very young people is that, yeah, but our culture kind of sucks. Look at how many people are starving to death in our culture. And usually what comes after that is me saying, look, over the record of history, our culture actually has the fewest amount ever imaginable of people starving to death. So while it is unfortunate that some people still starve to death in Europe, overall, as a proportion of the population, that's very rare. Utopianism is something that has been plaguing our minds in general, not necessarily mine or yours. Comparing everything to a utopian standard that not only never existed, but will never exist. How can that be countered? Because it's again a moral thing.
They're pushing communism, right? I think knowing the facts of history and being able to discriminate, tell the difference between, to know the nuances, however you want to phrase that is. I'll provide another example. I don't know if today you still need to have a criminal record to go to Australia.
That was mean.
Sorry to my...
They still deserve it. So
I have some good Australian friends, right? So, so that was a joke.
They still look at things from a backwards perspective.
But let's look at the Aborigines who... Now you see it happening in Australia. They're idolizing the Aborigines and the Aboriginal culture. And look, someone who will lie to you to your face will write books that are just full of lies. Let's be blunt. If they will lie in words, they will lie in words. It's that simple. There's a lot of bad academics out there, a lot of bad academic books. The Aborigines were in the same situation, even worse actually than the Bushmen in Africa.
Probably worse. They were sitting on the largest reservoir of iron on the world, and they still hadn't reached the Iron Age until
they were more primitive. Yes. I mean, at least the blacks in Southern Africa got to the early Bronze Age or whatever, So there was some degree of that happening. And they were extremely primitive. They didn't develop farming. I know people say, well, they did have little... Yeah, sure, come on, anyone can see some stuff growing and plant it in straight rows and hope it grows again next year, right? So this wasn't exactly what I would call farming on an industrial scale comparable.
Yeah.
Now, they used to, every year, they would murder up to 50% of their children that were born. They would crush their heads with rocks. They would rip them, or they would kick the woman in the stomach until she aborted the fetus, right? They would kick her, literally, and she might die in the process as well, right? They would crush the babies' heads with rocks. They would stone them to death. They would stab, whatever. They would murder up to half of their children with spears and rocks and so on. How is this defensible? Because they couldn't feed themselves. Because they couldn't feed themselves. The culture was unable to. So your white civilization comes along, discovers the land, builds it up. Conflict has been part of the human condition since the beginning, right? Progress, unfortunately, isn't going to be perfect. Humans fight. But now you're talking about a culture that is IQ-wise, what, mid-70s maybe? Any time you have an IQ below 84, you have an individual that doesn't have the cognitive resources to engage in intellectual debate. So therefore, they unfortunately become more emotional, and they're more likely to engage in violence as their form of expression. Now you've got a culture that has an IQ that is
way below 84.
Right. And unfortunately, this is also the case with a lot of the Southern African tribes, right? And now these people demand to go to university, and because of the cowardice, the intellectual cowardice that has been also justified with Christianity, Jesus wants you to turn the other cheek. I don't think he said be a coward, right? But this is how it's been interpreted and given to people. So even that message has been twisted and turned upside down and inverted and just, right? So you have all of this. So even the things that you would turn to for sustenance or for inspiration have been twisted. And
the pillars of the culture.
So go read it for yourself, right? Read the Bible for yourself. There's a lot of bad churches and bad priests out there too, right? But I assume people have sufficient intelligence to figure things out for themselves. So do you demonize the Australians for making Australia what it is? Or do you now elevate these Aborigines who are literally going to destroy that society, who don't have the cognitive resources to run that society, couldn't even create it in the first place? Unfortunately, until they step up to the plate, until they start going to school and start developing those skills, they cannot be allowed to, you cannot give them the keys to the car. And now you've got in South Africa a situation where people who don't have the education are being put through school. I mean, they've reduced the pass mark in South Africa to what, 25% now?
Yeah. And that's how you get those kinds. I don't know if you've seen the video. I'll send it to you if you haven't. There was a video circulating a few years ago where a lady was getting ready to become the chief of the physics department. Was saying that we should have decolonized science.
Yes, I remember that. Well, I've
yes.
watched all those.
Yes.
Our president couldn't read.
Yes.
He couldn't read numbers of more than 5 figures. 6-figure and 7-figure numbers he could not read. This is 1,000 and 2,000 and 300 and no, it's 10,000 and 3,000. This was our president, right? Now, it's not competent. So we need to unfortunately merit. Now, unfortunately, some of these ideas are not. These ideas, the value of these ideas has been destroyed, right? And unfortunately, in a fight, you have to sometimes fight. You know, man up.
Yeah, and fights have losers.
Yeah, so you need to push. Your ideas are better. I could have been a gangster sitting in a neighborhood which was drug infested. Let's use that word. Rat infested, drug infested. And I could not have my front teeth. I couldn't have bathed in 5 days, and I could be high. And that could have been me. That was an option in my life. I come from that. You know, I could have ended up there. I certainly know people who have, right? So I made choices, and I fought for other things. Now I had to take a lot of pain to do it, but it was worth it. You know, so know who you are, know what you want, and unfortunately, there's going to be hurt feelings, but it's better than a lot of bullets in brains. I mean, because that's where we're going if we allow this to continue down this road.
It seems that at some point it has to go through experience, because let me give you this example and you'll tell me what your thinking is about it. I've been speaking, and I'm going to avoid giving names, but I'll give you the names after we shut down the cameras. I've been talking to essentially non-white conservatives in the United States, trying together to figure out ways to spread better ideas, as you put it. It only even though I haven't changed the way I speak with them, I haven't changed the way I recommend people to write propaganda, and they haven't changed that much. It only started working over the last 5 years. The exact same tactics didn't work 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
The need wasn't there, I think. The urgency wasn't there.
Yeah, that's the thing. It seems that people only learn the hard way. Only when things go so bad that eventually...
people did this with good intentions, right? Let's allow these people in. Let's allow this person to have this position. They had good intentions. And
I mean,
as I recall, the road to hell is paved with those.
Very good intentions, yes.
You know, so I think now people are realizing, people are afraid. I see a fear. I see a concern. I see a change in society, and people are afraid for their children. I hear so many of my friends talking about fears for their children. And at least for that reason, all you need to do is speak the truth. The truth is corrosive to these ideologies. Just a little bit of facts. Not even the truth, you can debate about that again, but the facts. Just talk the facts. It is corrosive to these ideologies.
Yeah, they can't project darkness. So, you know, from that perspective, we always have the advantage of our own, because we only have to project a bit of light, and the darkness goes out. But on the other hand, they have the historical advantage of the entropy, because they only have to win once.
That is true.
For catastrophe.
Well, true. I mean, you can vote your way into socialism, but you have to shoot your way out.
Shoot your way out, yes. We know that in Romania. We've learned that the hard way, and we might have to learn it again.
You know, I do detect a sense of desperation in these efforts. Now, clearly, they believe they're close to the end game. Al-Qaeda thinks they're potentially 2 years away from their goal. The Muslim Brotherhood, 9 years away from their goal. Yeah. Right? The communists think they're this close to the presidency. Right?
Probably the commies are the most deluded out of the block.
Man, paper tigers, but really, these are not very smart people. But they're committed. You know, they're committed. They're willing to go all in. So also, just on that point, for those who aren't willing to go in or afraid, because I get a lot of people coming to me and sending me messages saying, you know, I can't support you publicly. I can't comment. I can't even like your stuff. But man, keep doing what you're doing. You know, this is, you know, it's going to cost me my job. It's going to cost me my friends, my neighbors, it's going to cause me all sorts of problems. But dude, I appreciate what you are doing, and keep it up. Right? I get a lot of that support. So for those who are afraid to make their own efforts in this regard, support those who are. You know, really support those who are. You know, spread the message somehow, whatever. Support them financially, whatever. But there are those who are willing to take the fight to the enemy. Support them. I mean, that's another thing I forgot to mention in terms of how to deal with this, because it's not just words of inspiration. Man, that means so much, because you're dealing with so much negativity on a daily basis. It's crazy. So that little bit of positivity that comes your way, it helps. You know, those are things that we really need. But your last comment was?
Actually, I was about to shift gears a little bit, because in the current year, everyone has to talk about Donald Trump. So, what do you make about the white supremacist leader in the White House
Orange
being
Hitler.
The Orange Man Bad? The Orange Man Bad, who I'm hearing is a very big racist.
I think the Democrats and the celebrities need to get to the border and warn those migrants away from America.
Yeah, because they wouldn't want to be living in a Hitlerian
They wouldn't want
society.
them to enter into a Hitlerian society, an orange Hitler society. Okay? They need to get to the border and make sure that those people stay safely in Mexico. Right? I think that is their first...
They have a very nice kosher communist president.
And they need to... Well, and those who promise to move to Canada should. Okay, look, I mean, man, excuse my French here, but you know that I'm a little bit of a shit poster.
I do.
I bait people. I go look for trouble sometimes, you know. But So for that reason alone, I love Donald Trump.
It's like our desires came to reality.
I'd be doing the very same.
Yeah, because and I'm sure you were doing. Many of the people who will be watching us have been doing just like myself. We've been doing shitpost for like 10 years, and 10 years ago we couldn't even begin to dream about it. Okay, can you imagine what would it be like if the president of the United States would be one of us?
Yeah, he's a very intelligent man, and look, people can have their opinion. That's fine. He's a very smart man. He's a strategic player. He knows the media. He knows how to manipulate. He knows how to turn the volume up to 11 on his foes and to make them do and say the most stupid things.
Case in point, the circling the wagon around the squad. I mean, the whole Ilhan Omar go back and fix it and then come back and show us how it's done.
No, he's revealed. He inspired people to step up. He inspired a lot. He did it. He inspired others to do the same. He's changed the political discourse and he's given people permission to fight back. And that fight back is working. And people are starting to expose themselves. He has exposed the, Operation Mockingbird, supposed to have ended, 1951? It didn't. It's happening today. June 30th, 29th, it's happened, July 30th.
July 31st?
30th,
Today is July 31st when we.
Wow.
It's gonna be August 12 when you're seeing
whatever.
this.
So July 31st, 2019, Operation Mockingbird is alive and well and kicking and producing idiots, right? And he has exposed the networks that collude to spread the same message. He has exposed the presenters. Has exposed all of this. They've had to, everyone with a brain can see now. So he has made them expose themselves.
And made the message mainstream.
Yeah.
I mean, 4 years ago, or even 2 years and a half ago, when I made the video called The Deep State, some of the comments were like, Lucian, that's probably one of your little bit conspiracist videos. This was before Trump was president. And I'm like, we'll see about that. And now we have the CNN talking about, well, maybe the deep state is kind of terrible, and maybe it's real, and maybe, I don't know about that. And
he's done amazing work in exposing a lot of this, and if he had less pushback from his own government, I think he would be far, far more effective. But clearly he's dealing with communists and even the Muslim Brotherhood within his ranks. They've infiltrated, because of the previous president, they've infiltrated heavily.
Then there's always a legacy over there until you clean up. Draining the swamp is a lot more complicated than probably even Donald Trump imagined.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but he's doing a fantastic job. Once people are informed, they can vote a lot of these people out of office or prevent them from entering office. And people are aware of the problems, and knowing what the threats are, the future threats as they grow, I think people would be willing to take extreme action, like deporting people. I think they would be willing to take action that otherwise would have been politically untenable in the past, that have been foisted on us by previous administrations. Because what happens in America affects the rest of the world.
Yes,
it really affects the rest of the world, and it's happening in Europe. And if America falls, we have nowhere to go.
Yes,
we're done. We're done. Poland's going to have to build a wall with Germany, and Russia's going to be visiting us very shortly.
I would argue that we need a wall both on the western border of the Intermarium, so at the Polish-German border, and on the eastern border.
I was about to say, because if America falls, Russia's going to be
climbing up that wall. So that's why it needs to be
you're going to find
Ukraine,
the tank.
Build a wall.
the tank columns are going to be here in a week. I have no doubt.
Not a week, but I get your point.
They'll be here.
That's true. Yes.
That's a real fear.
Yes.
That's a real fear. I mean, so people need to realize there is evil in the world. Now, you might not believe in biblical evil, but fine, there's psychopaths in the world. There are people with a different moral structure to you, different set of beliefs, and they are maybe not physically violent, but certainly they are morally violent, or they are evil people. They are wolves, and they will eat the sheep. And
this comes back to people who aren't always learning the easy way, but sometimes the hard way. A lot of the what's the politically correct term? Underprivileged communities in the United States, they've started learning the Republican way once things got really, really, really bad. And this is probably going to be the case in Europe too. Europeans are going to learn the hard way when things are getting even worse. Because at least here in the Intermargum, in Poland, Romania, Hungary, we've had within living memory evil ways. But think about France. France hasn't had a serious trouble on its territory for 70 years. Many people alive today, they don't remember how it is to even live for 2 days under an evil scenario.
Well, they've let go of their legacy. I mean, are they teaching it in school?
No, yeah.
You know, those are questions we have to ask. And if they knew, then they would be familiar with it.
Yeah.
But again, there's been this whole push to make people forget and to see the utopian world. That's the danger of the utopian world, but that's also the deliberate danger of it, because you don't see threats. You see only this warm fuzzy possibility of, you know, everything's good, everyone's good, everyone has no, they're not. No, they don't.
People are not basically good.
You know, and you need a policeman. Unfortunately, that's what we have, the police. Now, you're seeing what happens when people don't respect your culture. Things are falling apart in France. 2 churches a day being attacked, right? So you have threats from that, and they're destroying your symbols. Why are they destroying your symbols? So, well, destroy their symbols. You know, provide facts on things that are important to them. You know, and host parades. You know, do things the way people can see your symbolism, your pride. You know, talk about pride. No, those are kink parades. Those are fetish parades.
Yes.
Those are, those are things that should be in the seeing 2 men hump each other down the street while wearing BDSM gear and dildos is not pride. That's stuff you see in the bedroom. And if I did that with a female down the street, I'd get arrested. She'd get arrested. So I don't see how we tolerate that. There was first, we just want acceptance, we want tolerance. Now, wax my balls.
Oh yeah.
Now we're there.
We talked about that. The thing is that I remember in the prehistorical times of 2013, just 6 years ago, telling people that, look, if we fall on the gay marriage kind of bullshit, gay marriage, as I still keep on calling it, it's going to be not so long, less than a decade, until we're gonna get to the situations of similar to I couldn't foresee the wax my balls particularly, but I was like, yeah, this whole gender bending thing is gonna get terrible.
I've lived with a gay man. Okay, one of my best friends, my closest friend in South Africa, gay guy. Lived with him. Everyone thought I was his boyfriend. Awesome guy, great friends, loved it. The house was fantastically decorated. The food was amazing. The parties were great. A's across the board. Okay. He doesn't want to get married. I mean, there was no need for him. He didn't feel the need. But the idea was that, look, so fine, certain reasonable people, if there were a gay pride parade, I'd expect normally dressed people behaving like normal people, wearing business suits if they wanted to, just being normal and like, hey, we're normal and we're accepted. Yeah, that's great. That's normal. This was extremes. So the extremists have taken the control, and
arguably have had it since the beginning.
Yeah, well, in fact, if you look,
Stonewall was
just like the communists have their manifesto, just like the Muslim Brotherhood has their manifesto and plan, so did the gays, the gay agenda, big gay, whatever you want to call it.
The LGBTist religion. They
had their agenda. Yes. They have a written agenda. I've posted 2 of their documents before. They had a complete agenda written out, and what you're seeing today is a manifestation of their agenda. And the point was to make it extreme because they want to turn all of society gay. And I don't know how logical that is in terms of, I don't know, say breeding. You know, I don't know if we're going to have another generation after this one. You tell me. You know, I mean, put 100 gay people on an island. How many generations will they have? Not many, I'm guessing. But I'm using science and.
Yeah, but science is the creation of the white cis-het patriarchal. So no.
So look, I mean, you've got. So the whole point is, again, it's a thumb in the face. It's a thumb in the nose. It's a poke in the eye to the moral order of the West. It's deliberately a destruction of that. It's shaming. It's embarrassment. It's supremacy. It's dominance, right? And it's fine if people want to be. Respectfully have their parade. That's great. But you know what? They're not being murdered here. Why don't they go and have their gay parade in Saudi Arabia?
There you go.
You know, why don't they go there where gays are murdered for being gay? It's the Sharia.
Or in Uganda.
It's the Sharia, right? So there's a certain extremism there, and it is extremist. A lot of gay people are perfectly normal. But now you've got literally this extreme movement, this extremist movement. And this is not healthy for society. They're literally trying to co-opt children, give them operations, give them castrations, give them chemicals. 3-year-olds, right? To turn them into what they're not. These are extreme issues, and you're vilified for talking about these issues. So
you're a something phobe.
Thank you, appreciate it. Good to know.
Something phobe.
So
because I've lost the track of how many phobias I've been accused of. Cishet phobia.
Look,
cishet bigotry, and I'm like, oh, come on, I can't keep up with that.
So look, while I have the facility to have free speech, I will freely speak. All right, and these are issues. These are destruction of Western norms. These are, when you dissolve the ties that bind a society, that society is going to fall apart, right? Because over thousands of years of development and trial and error, they've developed these rules, the social contract that works, that has led to trust and success. Now you're looking at people wanting to completely destroy that glue and impose an experiment that has only ever produced failure. Right, but the whole point is to destroy the society, impose chaos, and then of course impose your own views on desperate people. Right?
Yeah, and hopefully out of the chaos a socialist order would arise. That's the theory. In practice, it's always a totalitarian society.
Correct, and so you've got this, unfortunately, this convergence of all of these forces that are working together. And I mean, you can trace what's happening from the Islamic perspective based on literally word for word what's in their documents, written in the last 30, 40 years even. You can trace the communist agenda. It's word for word what they're, what they've written must happen. And you can trace the gay agenda, which is an extremist gay agenda. No one has a problem with gays. No one here goes and murders gays in the street. No one cares. No one cares at all. But you do go to France and Germany and you read about gay men being attacked by mobs of Muslims. But is that racist to say that?
No, I guess. Although in France, I saw these particular numbers in a study by the ILGA. I'm sure you know what the ILGA is, the International Lesbian and Gay Association.
Okay, yeah.
And they were saying that is something weird is happening in France. So I clicked on it. I'm like, okay, what's weird in France? The vast majority of the gays are voting either with the right, Les Républicains, or the far right, the Front National. And the rationale for it was almost always, look, the right may not want us to maintain gay marriage, but they don't support throwing us off the buildings. Whereas, the tolerant left supports the people who want us thrown off the buildings. So,
And that's Sharia. I mean, that is, it says the people of Lut do to them, I mean, this speaks about, it's Quranic and it's in the Sharia that...
Yes. This is another aspect. ISIS was not extreme. ISIS was orthodox, rigorous. Correct?
Orthodox, yeah. They, in fact, Salafism has returned to the authentic Islam of Muhammad and the first 3 caliphs. It is just Islam as was practiced by the founder of Islam, right? So there was nothing extreme about it. It was entirely orthodox. And here's an interesting point that people... There's a copy, again, I've mentioned it before, the Umdat al-Salik, the Reliance of the Traveler. It's the most sold, the most bought, the most printed, the most highly authenticated, the most endorsed, the most trusted, the most available Sharia manual in the world, right? It is fantastic. It's a compilation of all 4 of the schools of Islamic jurisprudence. And it is a really good book. People should read it. It is horrifying. It is a horrifying read, right? I've provided copies to people online, and I'm happy to share the links and the people read it for themselves, what Sharia law actually says, right? Unambiguously says. There's a confusion about, well, it's extremists. Well, no, actually, if you read through the Sharia and you look through, because it's all based on the example of Muhammad, obviously the will of Allah. Look, brief digression. Christianity is about truth. Western logic is about truth. What is true? What are the facts that we can discern from reality? How can we match with external reality? Then, of course, you've got the whole, well, there's no external reality. That whole nonsense, right? What's that term? What's it called?
Postmodernism is
I guess there's a term, but there's another term for it. But yeah, whereas Islam is based on will, right? Think Crowley, right? Think will, do what thou wilt, and in this case, what Muhammad wilt is the whole of the law, right? So these are very different ideologies, very different
The
philosophies.
Islamic jurisprudence is, definitely draws its its precepts and its dictates from will rather than
And anything Muhammad
ascertaining the facts.
correct, and anything Muhammad did is both legal and moral in Islam and cannot be criticized. Now, in Islam, there's a distinction. Jihad is now there's two definitions of jihad. There's the dictionary definition, which is struggle. There's also the Shari definition, which is the Sharia definition, which is warfare on non-Muslims to establish Islam, to enforce Islam.
To enforce, yes.
Right? So if you read the Sharia, I've got multiple different manual citations I can provide that all say the very same. All the schools of jurisprudence. Jihad is warfare on the kafir, which is you and me and any non-Muslims, to enforce Islam on us, right? And to enforce Islam in non-Muslim lands, right? So that is the Sharia definition of jihad. It is violent warfare, no ambiguity about it. But jihad also falls into different categories. Islam makes a distinction between Fard al-Ain and Fard al-Kifaya. Now, Fard al-Ain is personal obligation, also called universal obligation, right? Which is the basic duty of a Muslim, the basic things. Pray 5 times a day, just the basic stuff, which falls generally into religious observance, generally falls into religious, what we would term religion. But Islam is only about 14% of the written text of Islam is actually about religion, about going to paradise, right? About serving Allah in terms of your soul. 86% of it is about politics and warfare, which includes the legal dimension. Right, both of those fall in fact under that. So the bulk of the text and the bulk of Muhammad's life is all about politics and warfare, right? So a very small portion of it's religious. So, and this is what is most interesting to us. Now the religious aspect would be protected as a normal religion, but the bulk of it is really equivalent to communism, Nazism, fascism. It's no different to what Hitler did. It's no different to what Lenin did, to what Stalin did. It's like those systems. Now, jihad is fard al-kifaya. It's a communal obligation, and this is very clearly defined in the Sharia. So the communal obligation means that a portion, a small minority of the community must always engage in jihad to impose Islam on the kafir. Because if they do not, then the sin of non-performance falls on the entire community and damns their souls. So we need to realize that. And then there's multiple kinds of jihad. There's different types of jihad. Violent jihad is one aspect of it, and there will always be those performing that, but there's different forms. So, and now if you read through the definition, it very clearly says that one who performs jihad obviously gains the highest levels of paradise from Allah. However, one who aids those in jihad receives the same, right? And this is very clearly defined in the Quran, and it's explained in the Sharia. So those people who aid and abet, who fund, who provide cover, who lie, deceive, etc. There's jihad of the pen, jihad of the wallet, jihad of the mouth, you name it. There's all sorts of, there's multiple different kinds. So lots of people are providing aid to the jihadis, and lots of people are doing a different kind of jihad. Your Islamists, as they define, are those who are simply providing non-violent or pre-violent jihadi activities. Your jihadists are your people willing to do violence, right? And this is compulsory. It is not an option in Islam. So unfortunately, you don't know who's who, you don't know what's what, and you don't know when. Unfortunately, the entire ummah has to then ultimately perform violent jihad if Islam is threatened, if their territory is overrun. For instance, you go into a no-go zone, if they send the police in, everybody fights. Because that's required, because that is colonized territory. A mosque that goes down is colonization. They've claimed land in the name of Allah, planted their flag. And any country, any land that has been claimed by Allah, for Allah rather, is Islamic in perpetuity and must be reclaimed if lost. So Hijrah is a form of jihad. This is migration. The Islamic calendar dates to when Muhammad moved from Mecca to Medina,
yes.
And that is the year 0 of Islam. That is when he, as an unsuccessful religious leader, became a political leader. He migrated as a refugee. So they're just following the example of Muhammad. They're doing what Muhammad did, and within 3 years, Medina was an Islamic city. There wasn't a single non-Muslim left in the city. Within 5 years, there wasn't a single non-Muslim in Arabia. And within 3 years of his death, they'd invaded 28 countries. So we are seeing a lot of these people are coming because it's hijrah. It is jihad. People need to be aware of this, that there are different kinds of jihad, there are different categories of jihad, but you don't need everybody to be doing it. Just one bad guy with a gun in a movie theater can ruin your day.
But Mr. De Jongh, there is no such thing as no-go zone. I mean, I've heard it on CNN, so it must be true. There are no...
Ask CNN to go there and prove it.
Speaking of which, have you seen that case where the Somali journalist, I mean, she was American, but of Somali descent,
was killed,
who went to Somalia to prove that there is
killed.
no violence and no Islamic terrorist violence in Somalia, and she died
No, ignorance.
in an Islamic attack.
Look, man, as people say, if evil doesn't get you, ignorance will. Right? So ignorance is not your friend. People need to read the doctrine. You cannot be fooled if you know. Right? So there's lots of waffle, lots of confusion. Just look. Read what Muhammad said and did, and read the Sharia. Seriously, just read chapters on leaving the religion, Ridda. Seriously, just read that section.
The whole apostasy chapter is pretty frightening.
And you're like, this is horrifying.
Yes.
This is evil. You look at it and like, good God, this can't be true. I was shocked. First time I read it, I'm like, this can't be real. So yeah, you read that and you realize, oh my God, this is horrifying. And understand that Islam is not defined by your Muslim colleague. It is defined by Muhammad, right? And you don't need anyone else's opinion. You can literally just read the books yourself. Read what Muhammad did. Look at the...
This is another thing. Take the bad guys at their word.
Yeah.
I mean, same thing with commies. I don't care if you have a friend who sometimes go to with a hammer and sickle flag, and otherwise he just works his job at McDonald's and is probably tame. I don't care about that. I read Lenin. And I take Lenin at his word. Same thing with Islam. Your Muslim colleague may be a nice person. Probably that's true. But if I read Muhammad, I'm like, yeah, probably not.
The bad guys at
their
word. There are people that take that at face value. The Sharia takes every passage in the Quran at face value. It doesn't reinterpret it while it takes it at literal face value. And there's there's so many things that you hear. There's so much distortion on the internet, but people will say, well, nonsense. When they criticize the Bible, they never say, well, it's, they always have it exactly on context.
Nobody's curious about the context of Leviticus, but we're suddenly all supposed to be very context conscientious on the Sharia. One final question on the Islam point. There have been lately several efforts, some of them funded by UAE, some of them more crowd-funded, people like Najib Nawaz.
I don't trust that guy, dude. I don't trust him as far as I can throw a piano.
Neither do I. But there have been several efforts, some of them more trustworthy, some of them, in my opinion, less trustworthy. Najib Nawaz would be in the less trustworthy category, of attempting to essentially forcibly drag Islam kicking and screaming through a reformation period. Are you optimistic in any of those?
Then they have to divorce themselves from Muhammad. He's the perfect man and the perfect Muslim. His biography in the Hadith and the Sirah speaks for themselves. The violence. He was a depraved, violent man. How do you reform the biography of a dead man? How do you change the life of a dead man? You can't.
You don't.
And if you cut him out, you've got almost nothing left. You have literally nothing left. You have a different religion entirely. Now, efforts like this have been attempted. There were the Mutazilites in the 11th century murdered by Al-Ghazali, who eventually imposed his will on Islam. Took it kicking and screaming back to the 7th century.
The Quranists who've been executed in Indonesia, who are just ignoring the Hadith, and as a result created a more peaceful sect. They've all been murdered.
So
they still technically Quranists still exist, but very uninfluential.
I'm cautious. I have to wonder how much of that is an influence operation designed to just a shaggy dog story, a wild goose chase, a resource sink for nothing. I've got to wonder how many of these how effective is Majid Nawaz? Not very. He gives people something to rally around, so they but really at the end of the day, Rudy Jassa, how successful are they? Like pretty much not at all, right? Not very effective. I still see things exploding You know, so I don't think they're very good at what they're doing. They need to maybe they need to be more honest about what's, because Majid Nawaz doesn't know. Either he knows what's in the Hadith and the Sirah and the Quran and he lies about it, or he doesn't, and he needs to read them. Because I've seen his debates, and either he's lying or he's ignorant. Pick one, right? And I'm a little concerned when I listen to him speak. I'm like, dude, do you know what's in your own books? And he was a jihadi at one point. So is he still one? You know, I ask. You know, I don't trust him at all. So yeah, I have doubts. So look, it would be nice. Why don't they just convert to Christianity? Problem solved. They become very devout, very active Christians, actually. They become very, very good at proselytizing for the religion when they do. Rather that, if the government wants to spend money, don't do de-radicalization, because that's part of the religion. It's part of that is standard, common or garden bog standard Orthodox Islam. It's not an aberration, it's normal, right? And some of them are always going to, right? They view us as the enemy. That's it. Convert them. Really, just do that. Seriously, train some priests and send them out to do nothing but that. You will win such powerful converts. You'd be amazed. They become incredibly good Christians.
That's the reason you've seen in the Dearborn video, which I presume you've seen it as well.
I've seen plenty
where they were, the local jihadi centralists from Dearborn, Michigan, were a lot more frustrated by that particular coffee shop who was doing called discussions about religion, because they're a lot more afraid of those kinds of efforts rather than general shitposting or trolling, which they can brush off.
I don't have the patience to do that kind of thing. I'm not that guy. Sorry.
Neither do I. That's why I shitpost.
So I prefer to slap people around online. But yeah, I think if there are people that this is their calling, they need to invest in this rather than in bullets and guns. Invest in missionaries. Seriously, in your own cities, in your own country, and in the Middle East, send them. Seriously, invest in missionaries and just send them out to become Christians. Good grief, you're going to see a massive change.
Yeah. All right, then in that light, I guess we can wrap this up. Is there anything that I didn't ask? And
I think we've done plenty. I've said several controversial things. I know that I say them, but I also say things I can defend. I realize that may not be no defense, but I say things that I can historically back up, factually back up. No, I think we've covered quite extensive.
Right. Then I guess we should keep the conversation going in the comment sections as well.
All right.
I'll be putting links in the low bar with the highlights of your work that are publicly available. And I don't know, let's do this again, maybe some other time, maybe 1 year from now or whatever, when I'm
visit Romania,
or maybe you're when you're visiting Romania. Let's do this again, because I think that if enough people do this, probably our March through institution is not going to be 100 years old.
No,
100 years long. Sorry, that's what I meant. Could be shorter.
I think. Look, they have been defeated because they've never been opposed. There's never been an organized opposition.
Yes.
And now in the information era, we can be. So yeah, I think they can be defeated in the information space because they have to lay the ground there first. So yeah, we can do that. And sure, there's likely to be violence in the future caused by them because they are setting up cells. They are training people, and that's in their documents. We know there's evidence for it.
Both the commies and the Muslims.
And there may be a Tet offensive type insurgency in the future in America and Europe. But I think we can win that, right? And but I think if we take this fight, we get either we'll prevent it, or we will head them off if we just tackle it in the information space.
Right, Mr. De Jongh.
Cool.
Thanks a lot for coming up to my show.
Cheers. Thank you.
And see you all pretty soon. Cheers.
Thank you.